All right, I hit record now.
Perfect. I'm going to start singing.
Do it again. Do it again.
And,
all right.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, everyone. Hey, everyone. This is your friend Joseph Craven. We're here on Running Out the Clock.
And we're going through puberty.
Once again, we're here on the world's foremost puberty podcast. No, never. I'm Joseph Craven. That's Keith Harkins. We're here to talk about South Carolina Gamecock football.
We're very sorry.
Keith, before we hit record, how did you describe the Gamecocks? They're the team that you somehow find yourself caring the least about.
Right. So, in not only a conference, but in the same division as teams like Kentucky, Vanderbilt, and Missouri, South Carolina is still somehow the team that I care least about.
It's weird. And I don't know if it's like residual, like leftover from South Carolina is not a real SEC team and neither is Arkansas, you know, that sort of mentality that I might have inherited from my dear sweet mother who despises those two teams.
They ain't real SEC, y'all.
Yeah. So, oh, you sounded just like her. That's exactly how she talks.
I've been practicing for years.
Yeah. Spot on and Craven impression. Anyway, but you know, I don't know if it's something like that, but it's just kind of still weird. Like South Carolina doesn't seem to have like they just feel like the culture around them feels more like, you know, an ACC team, you know, it feels more like a Big East or something, you know, it doesn't really feel like the SEC. It's kind of strange, but all that being said, you still have weren't they preseason top 25 last season, I believe. I don't think that lasted, but I think they were preseason, you know, they consistently, I mean, shoot, I was just talking with Rowan Gray on the Mississippi State preview the other day and mentioned how I was at the gym and saw a classic SEC game on the TV at the gym. And it was number 10 South Carolina and number 8 Arkansas playing each other. And this was 2011, you know, it's like, It's not terribly long ago that South Carolina's doing well. You know, it's not all that long ago. They've got, as you pointed out before we hit record, like, you know, talents like Jadeveon Clowney and Marcus Lattimore. I almost said Marshawn Lattimore, different Lattimore. Marcus Lattimore and Alshon Jeffrey, you know, all of that. And now they are where it's like you just kind of expect them to be in the middle. Even despite all of that, you expect them to be in the middle. It's weird, right? It's just weird.
Mm-hmm.
But here we are now, looking at the 2019 edition of the South Carolina Gamecocks. An important one because this is the 4th season under head coach Will Muschamp. Will Boom Boom Muschamp. This is it. Like, he's fully got the guys that he sets out to recruit. He's fully got his system in place. He's fully got all this. He's got some returning talent in Jake Bentley. He's got some returning defense. He's got some good time recruits the old good time recruits. Sure. All right. Sure. Yeah. He's got some big time recruits. That we'll talk about, including an up-and-coming, possible really good quarterback. All of this, though, you look at it, Will Muschamp, 4th season. I mean, what demands are being put on him this year, Keith?
To make it through a season, for one. Historically, fourth years as a head coach of a SEC program have not been kind to him.
No. I mean,
of course,
the one example we have.
Right. I mean, still a history. The reference there, of course, is that Will Muschamp was fired during his 4th season as head coach of Florida. And what's really tough for him is that like Jay Bentley's coming back, but Deebo Samuel's gone, and he was I'm not going to say their only weapon, but he was a lot of their offense.
Yeah, I mean
Uh,
they had some other stuff going on, but you're absolutely right. You talked about just a game breaking type of talent for sure.
mhm. um, Tyson Williams, who was one of the running backs last year, transferred out.
Yeah, he's gone.
And so they're going to rely on um, a couple of guys, mostly Rico Dowdle, um, who has a decent yards per carry average throughout his career. It's a hair over 5 yards per carry, which gets you a first down every couple of runs. But
Yeah.
um, there's there's still nothing really exciting about their offense that that Will Muschamp can kind of hang his hat on. You know, Jake Bentley is 1-10 against ranked teams,
Yeah.
and playing in the SEC, you're going to be playing against a lot of ranked teams.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. Especially in the East, with Georgia being as strong as they are now. Looks like Florida's back. Um, so both of those teams figure to be ranked whenever South Carolina plays them.
Yeah.
Who knows about Tennessee? Tennessee may be
Yeah. Will they be improved? Will they not? Yeah.
right. And then, of course, there's Kentucky and, like the SEC East, I think this year is going to be maybe top to bottom better than they were last year, just in terms of like averages. Maybe not quite as many like top heavy teams, but
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be kind of rough for them. And we say that coming off a year where, like you said, they were a preseason top 25 team. And there was a lot of people that were picking them to upset Georgia in the second week of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that did not end up happening, despite having a very close first half. Georgia did Georgia things to them in the second half and
Right.
beat them, and then South Carolina kind of stumbled to a 7-6 finish. Not terrible, but when you go into a year, preseason top 25, and expecting to potentially beat a national championship favorite, um, 7-6 mark is not what you want, um, especially going into a year this year where you kind of lose a decent amount of your offense. So it's going to be tough for Will.
It absolutely is. I mean, this is where you have all the pressure in the world piled upon you as a coach, because this is where there's no excuses anymore. I mean, to an extent, third year is really when you have that as well. But fourth year, like, there's nothing,
Right.
no excuses at all. And when you have a third season, and I pulled it up real quick, all of us in last year's predictions thought South Carolina was going to be in the top 3 of the East.
Mm-hmm.
I actually thought they'd end up topping everyone but Georgia in my predictions, but obviously that's not true. So they had all the expectations in the season. And the thing is, they actually return, I mean, minus Deebo Samuel, they really return just about everyone of importance. Tyson Williams left, but Tyson Williams was not one of, he was third on the list in terms of yardage. He was tied for first in terms of rushing touchdowns. But they returned Rico Dowdle and Mon Denson, who actually were their two top rushers. And I'm looking it up. They actually have on their roster, they have like 30 running backs listed. Yeah, it's a lot. They've got senior Rico Dowdle, redshirt freshman Deshaun Fenwick, redshirt senior AJ Turner, who played some last year, redshirt freshman Levante Valentine, redshirt senior Caleb Kinlaw, redshirt junior Slade Carroll, redshirt senior Mont Denson, true freshman Kevin Harris. That's a lot of running backs to have.
Yeah. I guess the hope there is that you have like 150 yards rushing per game, but it's split between 7 people.
Right, exactly.
Everyone's got 30 yards.
Yeah. And in that, I mean, Rico Dowdle led the way with 123 attempts last year. Good on him having a 1-2-3 attempt season. Is nicely done. Denson with 86 carries behind there. AJ Turner clocked 46 carries on the year, and Deshaun Fenwick 21. So obviously, not like major playing time there. But I mean, without Tyson Williams, Williams taking 70 of those carries. I mean, they can go realistically 3-4 deep, no problem. It's just a matter of, are any of those guys playmakers? Are any of those guys going to? Because at the end of the day, I mean, Dowdle and Williams combined for 8 touchdowns.
Right.
You know, and that's really, you want to have your starting running back get 8 touchdowns in a season. You know,
Right, exactly.
You don't want to split that between 2 guys. On the flip side of that, I mean, yeah, they lose Samuel, and he's an incredible playmaker in all kinds of ways, not just receiving, but kickoff returns and stuff like that. They actually returned Brian Edwards, was a big-time receiver. He's a big yards per reception guy. 15.4 yards per catch last year and 7 touchdowns. Shee Smith, 673 receiving yards last year and 4 touchdowns. He comes back as well. So they've got like 2 good options if they want to keep slinging it with Bentley. But the questions come down to, is that offensive line going to be good enough to, you know, is the offensive line and running game, is that going to be good enough to give relief to what is a normally pretty good passing game? And is that going to pay off in helping Bentley, you know, do a little bit better? Only 27 touchdowns to 14 interceptions last year, you know? And of course, we always know that interceptions are not always the quarterback's fault. There's a lot of times that it's tipped passes or receivers making mistakes that cause the ball to end up in the wrong spot, you know, that sort of thing. But you're still looking at, okay, yeah, maybe Bentley is going to be able to fling the ball around to Edwards and Smith. And I don't know what returning talent will step up in like a third role, but that's 2 good targets. And that's more than Mississippi State has. That's more than some other, you know, SEC teams have that have 2 good receiving targets. Is the running game going to do enough? You know what I mean? And that's like when you look at South Carolina, that's the biggest concern there, is whether or not there's any balance there.
Right.
Because that's what I think they've always struggled over the past while. I mean, even going back into the Steve Spurrier days, they've always kind of struggled to have an offense that is consistent and balanced enough to be consistent, you know?
Right.
I mean, this isn't West Coast Pac-12, you know, air raid style play in the SEC. Yeah, you have to either throw for 5,000 yards, or you have to be able to throw for 2,500 to 3,000 and have a 1,000-yard rusher. Like, that's what you have to be able to do. And South Carolina does neither of those things.
Right, exactly.
It's so weird. So that being said, I mean, how much confidence do you put in Bentley? Let's focus on him for a minute here. As the returning, is he a redshirt senior this year? Or is he just a regular senior? I'm trying to remember if he's a 5th-year player or a 4th-year player.
I think he's just a 4th-year senior.
Okay. Yeah, so he's a 4th-year player, but he's seeing significant playing time going all the way back to his freshman year. Looking it up right now, I mean, he played in 7 games freshman year, threw for 1,400 yards. You know, sophomore year, 27, well, a hair under, 6 yards under 2,800 yards total. And then last year, over 3,100 yards. So steady improvement in the touchdown numbers as well. What do you think that means for South Carolina moving into this year to have a super experienced senior behind center?
Yeah, I mean, when you have like a backfield basically, you know, full of question marks about how well can they actually play as a unit, and a wide receiving core that loses its, you know, clear-cut number one guy, it's good to have a quarterback that has shown progression and just overall getting better every year through you know, basically 3 full seasons. So from like a leadership standpoint, that's great. You know, skill wise, I don't think anybody would rank Jake Bentley at, you know, near the top of like quarterbacks that the SEC has to offer. Still though, like over 7,000 yards passing for his career, 54 touchdowns, you know, not bad. The issue is going to be his decision making. He has 30 interceptions, sorry, through his career, which is not great. Um, and so there's some concern about his decision making. I think I remember in the South Carolina Florida game last year. Uh, he had an exceptional first half and then came out in the second half a lot like the rest of their team and just kind of pooped the bed.
Yeah,
Uh,
it wasn't great. It
yeah,
wasn't great.
he turned the ball over a couple of times, just made some very bad decisions. And so what they need from him, I think, more than anything, is just consistency. Um, and I think that's what Coach Muschamp's looking for. I think that's going to be what the offense in total is looking for. Um, but we'll see kind of what happens there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at his numbers, and obviously, like the skill is there in the
Mhm.
fact that increasing yards, per completion over last year. Always hovering in that right where you want a quarterback to be in that 60 to 62% completion range. Like that's kind of the bare minimum of what like a quarterback should be. Um, Really, even honestly, let's be honest, it's college. You could probably say 55 to 60% is actually where
Right.
you want a quarterback to be in college. And he's over that. So, like, he's doing fine there. But it's just, you look at those turnover numbers,
Yeah.
14 interceptions last year, 12 the year before that. Um, and that's more interceptions off of less passing attempts than the year before. So,
Right. Yeah. Like the like the overall numbers, I don't think are as important as like the ratio is. So like maybe for a season like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 ish interceptions when you're only throwing for 20 touchdowns, that's not a great look.
right.
But if you're throwing like 45 touchdowns and 12 interceptions or 13 interceptions, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. If
That's
you're if
acceptable.
you're if you're attempting 500 passes on the season, yeah,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like the percentage is there then.
yeah,
But for a team that's looking to, I think, be fairly balanced on offense, that ratio's got to get a lot better for him for them to have a whole lot of success.
yeah. I mean, just for comparison's sake, and this is an unfair comparison, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but like for example, Gardner Minshew last season threw for 662 passes, right? In total, he attempted 662 passes, completed 70.7% of them, um, and in the
Stupid.
process, only threw 9 interceptions.
Yeah.
And as mentioned before, interceptions aren't always the fault of the quarterback, but he's the one that gets the stat attached to him and all of that. And so because of all of that, there's this whole, even if he's a returning starting senior, most I'm looking up some reports right here. Most places are going to say he's still not even in the top, 6 or 7 of SEC quarterbacks because
Yeah.
he's really a lot of his success is probably off of um, the talent of the receiving groups around him, off of Debo Samuel, off
Right.
of I just drew a blank on the kid's name again, even though I had it right in front of me. Uh,
Brian Edwards.
Brian Edwards, thank you. Off of She Smith, all of that. So I think having those weapons there to return, including having, I mean, all of their skill positions return, right? Like
Right.
every wide receiver minus Samuel, every running back minus Williams. That's a lot of depth. That's a lot of returning production too. You
Mhm.
got to think that that's going to be super helpful to Bentley, and that's going to be kind of maybe the key to helping him this season. But then it comes down to, okay, is the offensive line good enough? you know?
Yeah. And it's just the fact that like really successful teams have like at least one player that's like an actual game breaker.
Right.
And Debo Samuel was that player, and now they
Yeah.
don't really have one.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe Brian Edwards shows out, maybe Shee Smith shows out,
Yeah.
but
I mean, Brian Edwards had some highlight reel long catches and everything this past year.
right. But like I don't think that anybody would ever really argue the fact that like Debo Samuel can like make or break games for
Oh
you.
yeah.
You know,
I mean, I will, like, if you force me to,
gun to head, can
to,
you do
yeah,
it?
to try to come up with an argument, I'll try it. It's not going to be a good argument. I'll let you know that much right now. But I mean, I'll try it, I guess. um, but that's what kind of makes South Carolina such an interesting team. Is that, I mean, as mentioned, yeah, they're lacking amongst all of that. They're lacking the Lattimore and the Clowney and the
Mhm.
Jeffrey. They're lacking that, exactly what you're saying. They, um, uh, I mean, you had guys on those teams back in the day that were able to make, and we joked about it, but able to make, Steven Garcia into, a quarterback that people thought was going to be a reliable quarterback in the SEC. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
do it for him. Maybe they could do it for Bentley. 32 career starts. One of the most experienced quarterbacks in all of college football.
Yeah, that's a lot of football.
Yeah, it's a lot of football, and so he's got to be able to cut down on mistakes, especially because South Carolina's got a terrible schedule that we'll talk about.
Oof.
That we'll talk about later on.
Get bad.
Yeah, so South Carolina gonna need, really, I think, and you can tell me if you agree with this or disagree with this, but I really think that if the line and running game halfway produces, like if Dowdle can break, if Dowdle can break 750 to 800 yards next season,
Mhm.
because I feel like they're going to be a by committee backfield. They're not really going to. I don't think Rico Dowdle's going to get more than 120 carries this next year.
Right.
Last year. So if he can, but if he can break 800 yards or something,
Mhm.
750, 800 yards, if they can get more out of that, I think that's going to push South Carolina or help Jake Bentley out a whole lot more. But I think that's the key. I don't think the key is necessarily on Bentley to prove a point. I think it's on South Carolina to prove that they can run the ball a little bit more dangerously.
Yeah, I think that if you get from those two guys, 700 plus yards each,
Yeah,
and 8 touchdowns each, then you're doing pretty good.
I like it. And I think South Carolina should like it.
They should, but they won't.
Yeah, we'll just have to see how that works out. So, so now we have to go and flip around to the defense, though. We talked a good bit about the offense at South Carolina, which is weird because I feel like not even during the Spurrier days did the offense generate the headlines at South Carolina. But here we are. Anyway, this is an interesting unit to me because I feel like this is once again a defensive unit that just lacks a lot.
Mhm.
They don't have the game breaking defensive talent on defense either. Like a particular standout individual game breaking talent. I mean,
Mhm.
but they've got potentially some really good corners. They've got potentially, I'm looking at it, a couple of good linemen. But there's question marks all over the field for safeties, for linebackers in particular. That being said, they do have they did get a 5-star recruit, defensive line recruit in Zach Pickens this past year. So maybe he's going to be like an instant contributor on that sort of thing. We look at this defensive unit for South Carolina. I mean, what's it going to take, you think, for them to be a good SEC? What makes a good SEC defense in your mind? Because I feel like linebackers have a lot to do with it, but we're kind of in an era right now where it seems like defensive lines are
Yeah,
really stepping up.
yeah, front seven. Like having a really good secondary is great. But if you don't have a truly dominant front seven, your defense isn't really going to stand a chance against um, a conference full of teams that love to get gigantic offensive linemen and just run everybody over.
Yeah.
Um, uh, their linebackers are going to have to play a lot better this year than they did last year. I think I think that their linebacking crew was kind of their Achilles heel, if you want to say that.
Yeah. Certainly seemed like it.
Yeah, they were touted as being maybe one of the best linebacking crews in the SEC East anyway, and they just did not play well at all, and they just missed assignments and couldn't tackle, and it was just a mess for them. But like you said, they have uh, at least a decent defensive line with a guy that could apparently potentially go in the first round of
Yeah.
the NFL draft next year. Um, Javon Kinlaw, who big dude, real quick. Not going to be really a comparison to like a Clowney or somebody like that, but very solid player, very quick. And then DJ Wanham, um, after having an ankle injury last year, I know a lot of people were pretty disappointed to to kind of see like a whole season lost to that basically, but um, he's pretty exciting. Really good pass rusher. Kind of reminds me of like the pass rushing ends that Florida had last year.
Hmm.
Just really quick and powerful off the edge. And then, like you said, the secondary has they kind of remind me a little bit of like Kentucky's cornerbacks last year, where they're just
Yeah. Yes.
really tall with long arms,
Super
and
tall.
so they can kind of make up maybe a little bit for their inefficiencies, like tactically, with just their pure athleticism. Um, and so again, they've got strength up front, they've got strength on the back. So can the linebacker step up and kind of be the glue that holds that defense together? That a lot of like that's what linebackers are.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the big. I feel like, gosh, this sounds almost identical to what we were talking about when you and I previewed Missouri,
Mm-hmm.
just like a week ago. And the fact that you're looking at a team that has interior linemen kind of locked down, like with Kinlaw in particular, and then
Mm-hmm.
I think Missouri had the safeties, not necessarily the corners.
Right.
I could have that just backwards, um, but the linebackers are questioned, and we're seeing it again right here. I mean, a lot of times you got good corners and you got a decent defensive line, then you can establish a great pass rush off of that.
Right.
Having enough coverage to let the defensive line attack, and then having a good enough defensive line in rushing to allow the corners to cover. Right.
Mm-hmm.
They play off of each other, and it looks like South Carolina might have that, which could be huge if it works.
Right.
That's the big question mark: is will it work? I mean, you're looking at. I've just pulled up their defensive stats. They're a team that ranked 68th in team defense last year, um, in scoring defense last year in particular. Um, you know, giving up almost 200 rushing yards a game.
Yeah, it's not great,
Yeah.
especially when your head coach is a kind of like not even like he is a defensive guy. Like he's been known for his defensive quote unquote genius. He recruits defensive players well, as you mentioned earlier, getting a 5-star D lineman. But in your third year with the guy that you hired to kind of shore up the defense and establish an identity for your team, to be, by definition, middling,
Yeah.
that's tough.
Yeah, it just is. It just is. I'm looking at the stats right now. They didn't even have, they didn't have a great pass rush last season. TJ Brunson, their good linebacker,
Right.
had 4 sacks, and Javon Kinlaw had 4 sacks. And behind that, I mean, everyone else is like 2 sacks, 1.5 sacks. Not a great pass rushing team as a whole. That being said, I mean, if we look at, by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but there's like a bajillion Kinlaws on this team.
It's a whole family.
I think so. I mean, they got to be. I mean, Caleb Kinlaw is a running back on the team. Javon Kinlaw is, of course, the defensive lineman on the team. They both played at Goose Creek High School in Goose Creek, South Carolina, and then both of them ended up at community colleges in Mississippi for a year, which is super strange to me.
Right.
They both did this sort of thing, playing completely opposite positions and all of that. Anyway, but looking at Javon Kinlaw, this past season, 4.5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, 38 tackles total as an interior lineman. And he has all the physical tools, being 6'6", 300 pounds. Like, yeah, you could see why he could be a potential first rounder.
Right. Like just an absolutely monstrous human being who has the quickness of a linebacker. Like sounds a little bit like a one former MSU player, Fletcher Cox.
A little bit. Everyone knows I have such a big man crush on Fletcher Cox that he gets mentioned on like every podcast I record at this point in time. But I mean, he's taller. It's probably more of, if you want to draw a comparison to a Mississippi State player, probably more like a Chris Jones, who is a similar, 6'6", 300-pound interior guy who's quick enough to be more of like an end, but is on the interior. They're going to need a lot out of him, and we've seen it between Quinnen Williams, between Jeffrey Simmons, between Chris Jones before that, and Fletcher Cox before that. Interior linemen have a chance to be game-breaking talents. And it seems as though the South Carolina defense is going to need Kinlaw to become a game-breaking talent in this season in order to really make their defense stand out. His issue here is that he actually missed all of spring due to a hip surgery.
Right.
Apparently. So, he's got to come back from that healthy enough and in shape enough to do that. But you're absolutely right. Let's look, you go back to those cornerbacks in particular. I think the ones that are highlighted in a lot of previews are J.C. Horn and Israel Mukam. Ooh, that was a trickier last name than I realized at first glance. Whoops. Mukuamu. Those are the guys who Horn's 6'1" and Mukuamu is 6'4". Gosh, I love a tall cornerback, man. Love it.
Yeah, just huge people.
Absolutely huge. So you look at all of this, and you've already, kind of hinted at a little bit of your overall thoughts on, what it takes to be a good defense these days in the SEC and the importance of the front seven in general. Look at this just at a glance here. Does South Carolina have enough here, you think, to improve on that 68th best scoring defense in the country? Vanderbilt had a better scoring defense than they had last year. Missouri, better scoring defense than South Carolina had last year. Does South Carolina have the talent to improve on that, you think?
All of those teams, defensive juggernauts. I think you're being unfair to South Carolina.
You're right. My bad.
I think so. With Kinlaw kind of, being a rising senior, with DJ Wano coming back, hopefully TJ Brunson stepping back up. They got a lot of upperclassmen that look to have a chip on their shoulder to kind of prove that like these are your quintessential, must champ defensive guys. Because like, remember while he was at Florida, Florida's offense was was bad, but they always had like a top 10, top 15 defense in like every category. Just amazingly talented people. And so um, uh, I think that they have a lot of talent on defense. It's just, can they realize that potential? They seem to think so. Their defensive coordinator said that their defensive line is the best that they've had since Muschamp got there, and I would hope so. As
Right.
you keep recruiting, like high end people, and
Yeah.
then of course, Horn and Mukwamu, um, hopefully can shut things down on the back end. I would I would say yes, almost just by default of everybody being a year older, a year better, and um, with some of those underclassmen coming up and kind of filling roles, uh, I think that they can make a step forward. How much of a step forward remains to be seen, but
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even on a smaller note here, um, looking at uh, their recruiting targets and trying to see who they've been going after. I mean, they obviously they're the star of this past recruiting class was Zach Pickens,
mhm.
the 6'3", 295 pound interior lineman. Behind that, they've got the replacement for Bentley and Ryan Hilinski, who is one of the top quarterback recruits in the country. But then they also pick up, a 6'4", 270 strong side defensive end of Joseph Anderson, who's a 4-star recruit. They pick up a
Mhm.
4-star corner in Cameron Smith. They pick up some safeties, more corners, and some more, they're trying to address those needs. And if you look at their recruits in general, what they don't have a huge amount of in there, which I think is very interesting, not a huge amount of linebackers, not a huge amount of offensive linemen.
Mhm.
I think there's about maybe 3 linebackers and well, no, I see a couple offensive linemen at the end of the list here, but that there's not addressing some of those needs that it seems maybe a little bit worrisome for them on defense, considering they needed improvements um, in the linebacker position. They need to make sure that their offensive line can protect whoever is running the ball. They need to do all of this, and it maybe is not maybe not all of the needs they have, but the ones that they picked up, some defensive line help and possibly instant contributors if Anderson and Pickens are good enough to cut into there. It's the top end of this class is good. The rest of it maybe not as great. So it'd be interesting to see if any of them end up being contributors off the bat. You know.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's look at South Carolina's schedule then, because this is, as we mentioned, not too pretty. They opened things up with a big South Carolina, North Carolina rivalry matchup at Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte, North Carolina. So that's a quote unquote neutral site. I guess that's all close enough where it can still work. It's like meeting in Jacksonville for Florida and Georgia to play each other, right?
Right.
Good comparison.
Sort of.
I made a good comparison. No, anyway.
Given that Jacksonville is like a 45-minute drive from Gainesville.
Okay. All right. Then never mind. I take it back. Uh, uh, Charleston Southern, a non-major opponent there, but then they go straight into a matchup against Alabama. So there are two like D1 FBS matchups to start things off are North Carolina and Alabama. They don't get a chance to like start off against Charleston Southern, which is kind of what you would want, right?
Yeah, there's not really like a warm-up game here.
No. I mean, if there's any consolation, of course, it's that North Carolina was bad last season under Larry Fedora, went 2-9, he got the boot. But then, of
They're
course,
going to be bad again this year.
right. So they're probably going to be bad again this year as they try to rebuild and fix things up. But they've got Mac Brown in there, a North Carolina legend in Mac Brown, who's hoping to kind of right the ship. We'll see if he still has any coaching juice left.
Man, it's so weird that just a few seasons ago, like North Carolina was a dark horse to be like that playoff buster.
I know
Them
Fedora.
in Iowa, yeah,
Fedora. He can work his magic for about one season, But
yeah.
anyway, but you got to go. You got to have Alabama right there. I mean, it's a home game for what it's worth, but it's Alabama to start the SEC slate. You got to travel all the way across the country to go to Missouri. Um, in your next SEC game, you've got Kentucky at home. You got to go to Georgia. You got Florida at home. You got to go to Tennessee. You got Vanderbilt at home. You got App State as a warm up before you have to go out to Texas A&M. So you're having to travel. If you're South Carolina, you have to travel the
You're
farthest
traveling a bunch.
possible
Yeah,
to go to Missouri and Texas A&M. But in between all of that, you've got Kentucky, who might still be pretty good this year. You've got Georgia, who probably is the best team in the East still. You got Florida, who might be the best team in the East. You got Tennessee, who, as you mentioned earlier, might be improving. You got Vanderbilt, and then you've got Texas A&M.
and you got Vanderbilt.
And then you got Texas A&M and Clemson to end the season, right? Like, that's rough. That is so rough.
That's a brutal way to end the year.
Yeah, what do you think of this whole schedule here, man?
What's really interesting to me is that it seems like every SEC team just has a brutal October. I'm not like it's really confusing because you would figure that like maybe one or two teams would have like a cupcake in there somewhere. No, they all like everybody somehow plays like the best teams in their divisions during October. Maybe that's by design. I don't know. But yeah, like going to Missouri is not going to be particularly easy. I mean, I would almost expect a loss from them there.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's going to come down to whether Missouri has something to play for at the end of the year. I do think that's going to be a major factor with Missouri. So it could be that, they don't have any, major motivation other than, prove we're okay and maybe get drafted.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then, as you mentioned, they have Kentucky at home who, they lost Benny Snell. They lost Josh Allen. They lost a lot of their defense that made them a really exciting defense to watch. But they still got players on offense. So they're still going to be, at the very least, a decent team and not an easy out by any stretch of the imagination. And then you've got the distinct pleasure and privilege of playing Georgia on the road and then Florida at home
Right.
in consecutive weeks before going to Tennessee, which is never a really easy place to play at against a team that is, more than likely on the rise. So
Or at the very least, could get much worse.
Right, exactly. So and then you got Vandy, who they kind of had trouble with last. Like, it's just the SEC East is going to essentially be, one or two teams kind of beating up on everybody else, and then the rest of it is just like a scene from Roadhouse.
a lot of roundhouse kicks. Is that what you're trying to say?
Mm-hmm. Tons of roundhouse kicks, lots of broken chairs and bottles, and weeping and gnashing of teeth.
That's the most beautiful comparison I've ever heard here. It's true though.
It's the SEC, man. It just means more.
It just means more. We're actually obligated to say that terrible catchphrase once an episode.
I hope they never stop.
Most people don't realize. So, okay, man, it's cool to see the East like kind of getting scary again after a few years there in which they were way too top heavy. You know what I mean?
Right. Yep.
It's kind of cool to see that. I mean, between obviously the Florida Georgia line, but whether or not Kentucky can actually keep a little bit of an edge to them, whether South Carolina, stays, kind of goes over the edge a little bit and breaks into that 8, maybe 9 win, territory, maybe pulls off a couple upsets, so on and so forth. It's cool to see all of that. So, all right, let's look at this. How many, you don't have to give an exact number necessarily, but if you looked at this schedule in and of itself, I mean, how many wins do you think South Carolina could realistically pull off?
I think their basement is 5. Um, realistically, I don't. Realistically, man, they could end up right back where they were last year, and it wouldn't be surprising at all. At
You
seven and
think so?
six,
You think so?
yeah, I think they'll beat North Carolina. I think they'll beat Charleston Southern. Alabama is about as guaranteed of a loss as they're going to get this year.
Yeah,
I think they'll win one of Missouri and Kentucky.
sure.
I think they'll lose Georgia, Florida. I think they'll win one of Tennessee, Vandy. They'll beat App State, and then, oof,
Yeah, I don't see
I
more.
don't see them winning the last two games.
No, I don't see more than 6 wins here.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, they might jump up and beat both Kentucky and Missouri, but or beat both Tennessee and Vandy. But I don't. I think they're. I think that they're like this year's state team, and like what you mentioned last year, and that they have the lowest ceiling. Like the gap between their basement and their ceiling is very thin. Like
sure. Yeah. The
they've
problem,
got a sweet spot, and there's nowhere else to.
I mean, they're going to have to win 3 out of 4 between Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt in order to even get to 6 wins, realistically,
Yeah,
you know?
and I don't like their chances of pulling that off.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm thinking this could be a 5-win season,
Yeah,
maybe 6. Now, that being said, I think I could see them pulling off. I don't know. I could see them pulling off 3 out of 4. I mean, it could be that Missouri and Kentucky, completely
or
collapse.
just complete trash this year.
Could be Tennessee doesn't make any improvement. Could be Vanderbilt collapses under the weight of their, difficult schedule as well. So that by the
Right.
time South Carolina Vanderbilt even happens in November, Vandy's done.
Right. Yeah. And Texas A&M is still Texas A&M, and they could go completely off the rails after their like fifth game of the year, which is what almost always happens. There was that really funny GIF or cartoon, I think, that we kind of passed around last year that somebody from like SB Nation did, where it's the Texas A&M roller coaster,
Yeah.
and it's just everybody getting hype, and they pull off some big wins, and then they just go flying off the rails at like 5 or 6 games.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, you never know, but at the same time, you kind of feel like that should go the way of A&M. I mean, A&M even pulled it off last year, and we didn't even really talk much about South Carolina's last year's schedule.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, gosh, a 2-point victory over Missouri, a 3-point loss to A&M, a 3-point victory over Tennessee, a 4-point victory over Ole Miss, a 4-point loss to Florida.
Right. Yeah, they were on a razors, and like last year, remember, to end the year, they looked like they could potentially upset Clemson. They hung like 500 something yards on the eventual like national championship team.
Oh, yeah.
They were a weird team last year, man.
So weird. So very weird. But I mean, so many of those games could have been completely different,
And wasn't it that Kentucky game that it was like monsooning and everything was just disgusting?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a bad game in general. Just bad. I mean, like what? Let's say A&M and Florida. I mean, they're one possession away from A&M and Florida both being victories over top 25 opponents.
Mm-hmm.
And going all of a sudden to a 9-win season that includes 2 victories over top 25 opponents.
Right. Yeah.
At the same time, they're also one possession away from losses to Missouri, Tennessee, and Ole Miss. And so it's going to take a lot, I think, this season for South Carolina to overcome that whole deal of like they have to be able to actually win some games and not just barely survive some games.
Right. Exactly. And outside of their like FCS and like lower tier FBS teams, they didn't really handle anybody. Maybe Vandy.
Right. I mean,
Not even maybe Vandy. They kind of took care of business. against
Yeah.
Vandy, but like the rest of their season were just nail biters.
Yeah. I mean, they in that weird makeup game, they beat Akron 28-3 to end the actual regular season.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of forgot about that one for a little bit. But yeah, I mean, outside of that,
And then let's not forget that they lost to Virginia 28-0 in their bowl game.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
rough.
So they don't have much momentum coming out of
Right,
that.
right.
For what it's worth, bowl games can either mean a lot or mean absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They just unless it's like an actual like game that is like for a title. Bowl games are kind of like, okay, they're fun,
Right.
but so yeah. So I mean, all that being said, I don't think this is a great season for South Carolina, but I want to go ahead and maybe make a bold prediction here
Ooh.
and say that I don't think I think Muschamp stays though. I don't think that he gets put in the hot seat.
No, like I was reading earlier that Muschamp is 22-17 overall, 12-12 against the SEC in his first 3 years. Like that's not great. It's not bad. It's okay, and that's South Carolina football.
Yep, it's fine.
It's fine.
It's fine. But that being said, it's good because in that you didn't mention it, but we have the same preview opened up that actually has that stat right there.
Mm-hmm.
In that sentence says that he actually has more wins in the first 3 years than any other South Carolina coach in school history. So, and I think that's good. I think that this is, even if this season doesn't turn out super great,
Mm-hmm.
I still think that this is a foundational year. I think this is a year that they get through this. Maybe they luck out, or not luck out. Maybe they grind out 6 wins, go to a bowl game or whatever. And then I think Muschamp continues to develop what he wants to develop. And I think we see in a few years, we're talking about, the impact that this 2019 recruiting class with Ryan Hilinski and Zach Pickens really made. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. That like as long as South Carolina's bowl eligible and their players show improvement, their teams show improvement and development, and their compass is pointing north all the time, or at least more often than not, then I think that they're happy with their coach.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
I mean, Lou Holtz quit. Steve Spurrier quit. Like they haven't had to fire anybody because they've been okay with being bowl eligible and just kind of being fine.
Exactly. So even if this season's not awful, I think that it's still going to end up being one of those that South Carolina is able to say, okay, fine. Like, it wasn't the best thing. It wasn't the worst thing. We're just able to get through it
Mm-hmm.
and we'll do better next year.
Right.
But maybe this is a bit of a transition in between year for the Gamecocks.
Right.
All right. That is going to wrap up this preview episode of the South Carolina Gamecocks. We are able to actually talk for over 50 minutes about South Carolina, which either means one of two things. This is a very interesting team that we're very curious about and are trying to figure out, or we just have gotten better at BSing and are able to talk for much longer than maybe we should about some topics.
Well, we're both very good at BS, Joseph. So
Ain't that the truth? We're going to cut the BS and let this podcast mercifully die. That is Keith Harkins. Keith, thanks.
thank you.
You're welcome. We've got LSU and Kentucky coming up next week. Stay tuned. We're getting to the final 3 weeks of our previews here on Running Out the Clock. Before we jump into the final overall SEC preview coming up in August, and then, you know what? I think we might need to do you know, maybe because you'll be back from your honeymoon by then. Ooh.
Personal life news. This guy's getting married.
By the time the season starts, maybe we do a little live stream discussion.
Florida's playing a Thursday night kickoff game. Like, that's never happened.
Yeah, it sounds like
watching Florida football. Yep, they're gonna lose.
All right,
fighting Manny Diaz's.
Oh yeah, it's gonna happen. I love it. All right, that's Keith Harkins. I'm your friend Joseph Craven, and this has been ROTC Sports. We'll see you next time.